This is the first session that's mentioned oceans, and oceans are very, very visual. And before I launch into explaining why fishing our oceans sustainably is of such importance to all of us, I wanted to step back and remind everybody the critical role ocean health plays for all of us and why we should all be deeply concerned about the state of our oceans. They cover 71% of the planet's surface. We really do live on a blue planet. Not everybody realizes every second breath you and everybody else is taking on this planet is generated from the oceans. They are our blue lungs. They contain 80% of the planet's biodiversity. They absorb a quarter of our CO2 emissions every year. And since the Industrial Revolution, they've absorbed 93% of the excess heat. They are the engines that drive our global weather systems that all of our terrestrial and aquatic food production systems depend upon. So it's critical that we address the crisis the oceans are facing to make sure they can sustain us into the future. And they are under threat. Again, this is familiar for most people, but the ice sheets are melting, sea levels are rising. 15 centimeter rise in sea levels in the 20th century. The estimates at the moment are of another 30 to 110 centimeter rise in sea levels by 2100, depending on how urgently we tackle the global climate crisis. For the bulk of humanity that lives on the coast, for small island developing nations, this is catastrophic. Oceans are also becoming warmer and more acidic. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, in their Itchian report, stated that if waters warm by 1.5 degrees, 90% of all warm water reefs are gone. At 2 degrees, they're all gone. No more barrier reef, no more fish breeding grounds. Catastrophic impacts for local communities and livelihoods. The world's warmed by 1.2 degrees, that's an average. At the poles, it's triple that, 3.3 degree warming. And again, the latest projections are for oceans to be 2 to 4 degrees warmer. So I'm very much with Greta Thunberg on this one. Our house is on fire and we need to do absolutely everything. So I was delighted to hear the Deputy Minister talk about a climatic crisis. Turning to the fishing industry, this really is a remarkable industry, and I don't need to tell anybody who lives on the Aegean or the Mediterranean. It's part of our history and our culture. It's the last resource, global industry harvesting a wild resource for food. With aquaculture, maybe 200 million tons of renewable protein produced every year, worth over $400 billion at first point of sale. And to put that into context, the global beef industry is about 60 million tons. So oceans are deeply important for food security and livelihoods. 60 million directly employed in the global fishing industry, and the UN estimate that some 492 million livelihoods, one way or another, are connected to oceans and food production systems. So, seafood is important, but it is under threat as well. Production has increased fivefold since the 1970s. The UN, the latest Sophia report, State of Global Fisheries, has said that 35% of assessed stocks are overfished. That's a threefold increase from where it was in 1974. Production volumes up 5 times since the 70s, and demand is expected to double. That's why UN, the Blue Food Assessments are all calling for a radical blue food transformation. And as Jeffrey Sachs was saying this morning, none of this is rocket science. We actually have the solutions. We know what we need to do. We need to tackle the overcapacity, 4.6 million fishing vessels out there, very efficient at finding, hunting, and killing fish. We've got to regulate the oceans, and that's the number one cry. We need sound, effective management. The clock is ticking down, and there's so much I could tell you about migrating European fish stocks because of warming oceans, moving into different territorial waters that's causing havoc in terms of international management. But it's not just governments. And again, some of the speakers this morning talked about the critical role we can all play. My organization, the Marine Stewardship Council, runs a certification and labeling program for wild capture fisheries where we connect producers with consumers through the market. And all I'd say is 25 years on, it's proven. If you get those incentives right, if you get big business to commit to sourcing sustainably, you drive change. And in my last 5 seconds, This is a picture of the South African hake fishery. I was here a couple of weeks ago. This fishery entered assessment. Why? Because the European market was saying we want sustainable seafood choices. Turned out there wasn't one stock of hake, there were two. One was overfished. They were killing over 10,000 birds every year through interactions with the trawl gear, the bulk of them wandering albatross. Because of that market demand, they fixed all of these problems. They worked in partnership with WWF, with BirdLife International, with the government. Now both stocks are operating sustainably, bird bycatch reduced by 95%, and critically, from the industry perspective, they've won new export markets and 14,000 much needed processing jobs have been protected. So my final comment in my seconds that have gone is there is a crisis. The solutions are out there. We have Agenda 2030 and the SDGs. They are humanity's best last chance, in my mind, to shift us from a fundamentally unsustainable system of production and consumption onto a more sustainable and equitable footing. But my God, we need leadership and we need that sense of urgency because time really is running out. Thank you.